So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Samantha Bruno. I am the Interim Assistant Director at Marxe Career Services at the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College in New York, New York. I'm joined here with my colleague, Suzanne Grossman, who is the Deputy Director. And we are so excited to present to you the Living and Working in DC panel. And we're joined by three NASPAA School alums to share their experiences about where their life in DC, and post MPA and MPP degree programs. So without further ado, I'd like to get our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Aimee, please.
All right, well, thank you, Samantha, and thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So my name is Aimee Roberge. Originally from Connecticut, but I went to Baruch College and graduated with my master's in public administration from the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs. And I've been in the DC area about 3.5 years now. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, so just outside of the metro DC area. And I'm currently the coordinator for professional development and resources at the Council for Exceptional Children. And when I first moved to DC, I was at another association called the National Community Action Partnership. So I look forward to this conversation and getting to know all of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Paola, could we have you introduce yourself to the crowd?
Absolutely. Thanks, Samantha. Hi, everyone. My name is Paola Fernández. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I earned my master's in public policy at the University of Southern California, Price School of Public Policy. I've been in DC since 2019, October 2019, which is wild to think about. It's been 3 years. When I first moved out here, I was living in Crystal City, which was a great start. And I now currently live in Noma, which is in Washington, DC. Out here, I'm currently a senior consultant at Deloitte Consulting in their government and public service sector. And I've been with the firm for the last 3 years. So I'm really excited to chat more about that with all of you.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Jonathan.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Prevost. I graduated from Baruch School of Public Affairs, which is now the Marxe School, back in 2016. I currently live in the Maryland, DC area. I've been in Maryland for about 7 months now, and I work as a program officer for the state of Maryland at their Department of Housing and Community Development, and I manage about $500 million in rental assistance funding for to prevent evictions in the state of Maryland. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We're so excited to hear about your experiences. So just get started with the first question. So maybe we'll start with you, Jonathan, because you're the more recent one that's moved to DC. So tell me about your transition and moving to DC, and what challenges have you faced so far, and how have you overcome them? And even if there are challenges that you're still facing.
Sure, no pressure. I had a very interesting transition to the DC area because at the time I was working on Long Island. I'm originally from Long Island, and I was working at the National County Legislative Building. I was the chief of staff or elected official, and I just wanted to kind of get out of New York for a little while to kind of see what else was out there. And I was like, oh, I have a master's in public administration. Why not head to DC? Where my kind of skill set is in high demand. So when I made the decision to move out of New York, I was kind of aiming for Capitol Hill at first. So I had worked with the elected officials to kind of see if Chuck Schumer's office had anything, or if Congresswoman Kathleen Rice's office had anything. And there wasn't really much that pretty much sparked my interest. So then I just went on LinkedIn, to be honest with you. I looked up jobs in the area that kind of spoke to my skill set and what I wanted to do. I've been in the government space on the auditing side, and then in the chief of staff role, which was very impactful for me because I was very hands-on in the community and I wanted to kind of stay in that space and grow. And then I came across Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development, and they just kind of had the best course of action, best course for me to proceed with my career in terms of working with grant funding, essentially trying to establish policy. And they just had a whole robust catalog of what they do. They do things a lot different than New York. I'm a little biased because obviously I love New York. And my biggest transition, I guess the biggest challenge was interviewing, because when I interviewed, it was November of 2021. And my lease was up in December of 2021 as well. So I had to kind of secure the job rather quickly, but luckily everything had went through well. I interviewed well, and I really enjoyed the position. There was a little bit of a delay in starting, but it kind of gave me time off, which I needed, because at the time I was also a campaign manager. So between managing a campaign, managing an office, and trying to manage an interstate move, it was a lot. That was also another challenge. I would not recommend anybody do it in that order. But outside of that, I love what I do now. It's very challenging. It opened up my network substantially. When I was working in Nassau, I had working with one county. Now I'm working with over 24. So the growth of my career has been welcomed for sure. And that was pretty much my experience transitioning down to what they call the DMV area. I do miss New York pizza, though. I have to tell you, I have not tried any Maryland pizza or DC pizza, but it's definitely been educational and insightful, and a lot of area for growth. So that's my transition story.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing. And I mean, I get you on the pizza. I know I have friends who no longer live in the area. They will freeze things and then take it back with them, but that's just yeah. So Paola or Amy, whoever wants to go next.
I'll go ahead. I'll go, Amy. Hi, everyone. So my transition story is a little different, I think. So I came to DC right after graduate school. So I went through the recruitment process for the firm while at school. So that was a whole new world to me. I think my biggest transition was entering a different industry. My background is in local government. And so I worked for our mayor of Los Angeles for 3 years. I went to grad school and worked for council members. So my transition here was we're coming to a new industry. And so basically starting with a blank slate, which was both exciting, but also a little bit intimidating. So for me, I was able to find a place to live, which was great, but that took a little bit of time. So I actually came here a couple of weeks before my start date at work, a couple of weeks. So I had to find housing ASAP. And then that's why Crystal City was a great start. And that's in Virginia for folks who aren't familiar with the DMV area. And also DMV is for DC, Maryland, Virginia, not the Department of Motor and Vehicles, which is what I thought it was at first. I was like, why are we calling it DMV? Anyway, so that's why Crystal City was a great start for me. Yeah, the transition, I came in October 2019, so right before, the pandemic. So I was in person for a while working at the Census Bureau. They were my client. So moving around was really great, and exploring the metro too, because a lot of folks do have cars out here, but a lot of people use the public transportation system. When I'm a huge fan of it, because in LA we don't really use that. So yeah, I think being in person was great, and then transitioning into being virtual was a bit of a challenge, because I was just starting to kind of get my feet wet in the industry, trying to understand government versus private sector and how these kind of this intersection between the two, and then also adding on technology component here, which is what the firm does. So it was really interesting, but I think just getting to know people, reaching outside even of your network or outside of your industry was also really helpful for me, to just dabble in different areas, and then also get to meet a bunch of different people, because that was really the draw for me as well. Coming to DC was meeting all kinds of different folks involved in private sector and government and in politics. I've had a little bit experience of all three, so it was definitely just been a lot of fun.
Great, and thanks for clarifying DMV, because the other DMV is a lot less appealing, and I don't think we would be able to have a panel on that just yet.
100%. I was very confused at first.
Thanks so much. And then finally, Amy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I also did not know what DMV meant when I first was looking to move to the area. So very helpful when someone told me that. Yeah, so I really enjoyed my time at Baruch, and one of the opportunities that I had there was to do a semester in DC. And so during that time, took courses in DC and then also had an internship. So I was at like a small progressive policy advocacy organization. And through that internship, I was also doing some operations and development. So after I graduated, Baruch was able to do that a little bit part-time while I was looking for my next step. So I was looking for positions in New York City and the DC area, but was very interested in moving to the DC area after having that experience, getting to be here for a semester. And so I landed at the National Community Action Partnership. And I think initially moving to DC, one of the challenges was not knowing many people, but it was also exciting to me as well, because I knew there would be a lot of networking opportunities. And there's also an organization which some of you may have heard of, the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network. I think there's also one in New York City. And so that was another way, since I was in the nonprofit space, for nonprofit professionals to get together and network. So that was one way that I was able to meet people. I also just really tried to make sure I was leaving time to get to know my coworkers and spending time with my coworkers or going to other events. Thanks, Suzanne, for putting the link. We're going to other events after work. So just really exploring and seeing what DC had to offer was really helpful as well. And then I love that you all mentioned the metro as well. So that was another adjustment, but coming from New York City, kind of had that experience of taking the metro. And I also started at Crystal City. So yeah, that's part of my journey, and happy to go into more details about that in later questions too.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. So actually, my next question is, was any part of your transition impacted by the pandemic, whether you were already there when the pandemic hit, or had it affected what you were searching, when you were looking at jobs or perhaps housing or anything along the lines of that?
I can go ahead and start with that question. So I moved to DC right before the pandemic and right before a winter, like a real winter. Again, being from California, didn't know what that looked like. So at first, the transition from being in person every day to then being virtual was a little bit rough. I think because the draw to DC was you get to network with people, you're going to be among, like-minded folks, or you're going to meet a bunch of people within your industry and outside of your industry. So for me, it was a bit challenging, especially as I was coming into our firm. I didn't necessarily have the opportunity to really develop a cohort of folks that I could kind of grow with, because it was mostly virtual. So coming out and trying to relearn how to network virtually was kind of challenging for me. I think now we're at a point where the city is kind of back and moving the way it did pre-pandemic, because during that pandemic, everything was shut down here. There was really no movement. Everything was done virtually, as we've all experienced. But I think, again, the draw to DC was the opportunity to be in person and network, and that was hard to pivot away from and kind of like readjust and relearn. But overall, I think now that we're in a more hybrid space, it's been nice to kind of get back out there, do the virtual work, and then able to network in person. So overall, it was a challenging experience, but the city is coming back to where it was before, at least in my experience.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that there's like an exploration of like what the hybrid world is going to be. So it's not, it is a quote unquote new normal that we're sort of exploring here. Yeah. Either Jonathan or Amy, go ahead.
I'll jump in. I want to say, due to the pandemic, one of the biggest challenges was meeting my coworkers, because when I had moved down here, it ironically, I moved down here on December 31st. And I'm gonna put this out there, no offense to the great state of Maryland, but it was a very bad snowstorm and they shut the state down. They're not really used to snow. So it was a little, outside of that weather inconvenience and then COVID, I actually didn't really meet my coworkers until a couple of weeks of starting the position. And at that time, due to COVID, we were working hybrid, so we were in the office 2 days a week, and it was never really a full office. So I would see people on Zoom or like an email, but I wouldn't be able to put a face to a name or like be able to meet them until things had started. But now it's gotten a lot better. We're in the office more, and I'm able to build a rapport with my coworkers and some of the upper management as well, which I appreciate because I wasn't able to do that early on when I first started a couple months ago.
Great. And Amy.
Yeah, thank you. Fortunately, when I first moved to DC, COVID hadn't hit yet. And so just was able to really get to know those in the network that we were working with. And so just going back to my career transition, I really enjoyed getting to work for associations, and it's kind of like a built-in way of networking. So the first organization I was at was over like 1,000 community action agencies. And for those who may not be familiar, so basically they're like nonprofit organizations that receive Block grant funding from the government. So it's kind of a good mix between being in the nonprofit world and working with some federal government agencies. And then the position that I'm in now, it's focused more on professional development for special education administrators and teachers. And so it's similar work, but just focused on a different network. And so, yeah, it's just been really awesome to get to network through those networks because it's just a natural space to do that. And a lot of the work that I was doing was virtual. So doing that professional development and learning with people in different states. And so kind of already had that virtual element. But it was definitely challenging just going remote, making sure that I was actually picking up the phone to talk to my coworkers and not maybe only being on the computer. That was really helpful just to talk things through. And just trying to maintain that connection was a challenge, but also developing I'm sure you all can relate to this, developing my physical workspace was a challenge. When I first moved and was in Crystal City, didn't have like my own office or anything. So it kind of had a makeshift situation, but now in person. So it's been great to see people face to face.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I love how you touched upon like you had networks, but like during your not only your transition to DC, but also in a career transition as well. So I guess, were there any other networks that you had tapped into during your transition, or perhaps when you were already settled in DC? And Amy, let's start with you because you were already on this thread already, and then I'll pose the question to Paola and Jonathan.
Sure, yeah. Other than the like networks through my organizations that I was working for, like as I mentioned, the YNP and DC, and then also just there's so many organizations and associations in the DC area for professionals of all different backgrounds. I've also been involved in like faith-based organizations too. There's so many of those in the area for networking and just socially connecting with people too. So it's been very helpful for me.
Great, yeah. Either Jonathan or Paola.
I'll jump in. So in terms of establishing my network, I have to first shout out Suzanne because she did, when I told her I was moving to the area, she did connect me with some Baruch alumni who work in various areas around here. So that was very helpful. And like Amy, I was also a DC DC fellow for the Baruch program for the DC semester. So I actually had I was interning for Living Cities, and when I was relocating, I had reached out to them and my old coworkers as well. And they were pretty much essential in helping me, just get my footing back in DC, because DC it's a very beautiful city, but it's also very small. And so you tend to run in, you can run the possibility of running in several circles, not even realizing it. And I had also reached out to my professor, Professor Jarvis, who I did my capstone. She's I'm not sure if she's still a DC part of that program, but I reached out to her as well. And that was pretty much how I got my network established. And then one thing I did too, and I mean, I'm an extrovert by nature, so this might not be for everybody, but I went to events. There was this last month, there was a Congressional Black Caucus, and a friend of mine who was at the Pew Research Center, he reached out to me, and he was in DC for the week, and we went to a whole bunch of events. And I networked that way, and I made a whole bunch of connections. People work for the administration, the Biden administration, to clarify. People who are in Capitol Hill, people in the private sector, and it just opened up my whole network yet again. So I just want to say, like, putting yourself out there in DC, it can be nerve-wracking depending on how you feel, but there's so much benefits and people want to help, for sure. So that was pretty much how I got my network, and how I'm still continuing to establish my network now in this new space.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear, especially, I mean, completely understand, like, when you say, like, oh, I'm an extrovert by nature going to events, like, I find that, so, like, and Amy, you had mentioned, faith-based organizations, like, these are networks that are not just professional, but then also, like, you have your own personal interests that, you are able to make those connections as well, too, which is really great. All right, Paula.
Yeah, so this might sound cliche, but I literally reached out to my alumni network out here. So the USC has a USC alumni group, and I'm actually now part of their advisory council. So went from just attending, trying to get involved, to now starting to plan events and trying to connect folks to one another. And I got lucky. There was a group of classmates of mine that were also coming out to DC. So we were our immediate network. It felt like family. So we were inviting each other to things, hosting things at our apartment. So that was really nice, because one of my biggest concerns was building community out here, not having had a semester out here and not really knowing too many folks. It was kind of scary just, leaving family and friends in LA, but over time, it does take some time to really feel like you're building some roots and or settling in a little bit. And I think definitely by reaching out to alums, that was really helpful. And then slowly I'm also finding more Price alums too, which has been really nice, because we have that grad school connection. Even if they're, graduated several years before me or a couple years after, it's been really nice to kind of connect through our alumni.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually going to throw in like a very spontaneous question, because you brought up like having a community is so important. What's like one thing like that you all enjoy doing or that has been really important to you or been really instrumental in forming your communities? Let's say like outside of work. Like, I think everyone knows that like adult friendships are hard, especially when you're moving to some place like that can even be harder. So I think there's like an aspect of it. We'll go back to the working in DC, but yeah, like talking a little bit about the living in DC. How have you guys created your communities?
So for me, something that I've been really intentional about is once I've made friends with folks, kind of invite them to things. Being the first to kind of initiate those relationships, initiate an activity, has always been really helpful. And also encouraging our friends to bring their friends, because that's been a really easy way to meet more people. And I know they're quality people because they're friends with my friends. So it's just a really nice like chain of like friendships that we formed. Also, again, just inviting people to do something with you has been really helpful, like go to museums or invite them for a barbecue. That's something we did over the summer. Our apartment has a like barbecue area, and we had like a nice little barbecue, and it made people feel welcome. So I think just extending that invitation out is something that's really helped me build relationships outside of work, because all of those friends, they're not work friends. They're friends that I've met around and through friends. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah, and I can add to that. Another great thing about being in the DC area is there's so many parks, and you don't have to go far to find them. There's so many in DC, there's so many not that far outside of DC. And so that's something that I really enjoy doing in my free time, just enjoying all of the many parks that DC has to offer. And there's, again, so many groups out there. There's like women hikers or meetups, just people that you can find common interests with to do something, even if it's not related to work. So definitely encourage community. And I'm sure you all can agree with that too, how important community is, especially in the DC culture. And I mean, New York City is the same way. It can be really easy to get caught up in that really intense hustle and bustle. And so just finding that interest that you can enjoy and finding others who do the same thing. So definitely encourage that.
I'm gonna piggyback off what Amy said, and definitely based on your interest. Like, I like to cycle, and there is like huge cycle culture in DC. But my great equalizer is brunch. Okay, everybody likes brunch, and DC brunch is the best. I'm sorry, I love New York, but it's just a different kind of brunch. So doing brunch events, happy hours, the museums too. You know, it's like the Smithsonian museums are really cool. And DC, like New York, they have music in the park or movies in the park, and just taking advantage of those kind of events, which are free, and you kind of get a sense for the city because it's opening up more. But the weather is changing, so you know that's probably going to come to a close soon. But yeah, I think it's based on your interest. I'm also an Eagles fan, and I live down the street from the Washington Commanders Stadium, and I wear my Eagles jacket proudly. So the Philadelphia Eagles, excuse me, I should clarify. And you know, that's always a conversation starter, and that kind of, you know, breaks the ice, and just doing stuff like that, you know, kind of helps make new friends and gets me into different spaces. So that's how I navigate that.
Yeah, great. So Jonathan, I'm not going to ask like how you're from New York and you're an Eagles fan. I'll tell you that. But I will say, so one of my really good friends, I went to undergrad at SUNY Albany, and when she had been down DC, she joined a running group. Like that was like her thing. Like I knew she was in DC. She was was in her running group, and I was like, I always thought that was so interesting. So no, thanks you all for sharing that. Like I'm not really too familiar with DC and like the lifestyle down there, but now I know brunch. That's a big thing in parks. Yeah. So I think this will be, I think the last two questions, because I've seen a lot of good questions coming in from the chat too, and then we'll open it up for other Q&A. But what is something you know now that you wish you had known before undertaking your transition to DC? I want to go first.
I'll go. So I know Paola, you went to USC, and I saw some USC folks announce themselves. My little brother goes to USC, so shout out to USC. But using your network, like that's one of the things. You know, I used it, but I don't think I used it well enough to like really understand the level of opportunities that were out here. You know, I was at Baruch had did something a couple weeks ago with the Presidential Management Fellowship, and I had graduated I graduated 2016, so I'm way past the acceptance point at this time. But just talking to Suzanne and her time, like there's other opportunities out there, and like just having this conversation with folks, and being able to really just ask questions, right? Like putting yourself out there, and just looking for opportunities, because there's so many fellowship opportunities, so many management training opportunities out here, and just you're not going to know if you don't ask. So I definitely think one thing I wish I knew, and even back when I was here during my graduate school years, and just trying to figure it all out, that's probably one of the things I wish I knew back then that I know now. Just okay, you're building a network. Everyone out here is, you know, they're people are really friendly. It's not like you know, there's like ulterior motives or anything, and just asking for help because you don't know what you don't know. And I would say that's probably my biggest takeaway from it all.
I think I'll add to that, Jonathan. For me, I think the biggest takeaway is not to be so self-conscious or nervous about reaching out. I think for me, that's something I'm growing and growing out of, and it's taken time, but not being nervous, just being very intentional and direct with what you're looking for, and having clarity on that is definitely important to kind of do the work before reaching out, but not being nervous. And if you don't know the answer, you can find it out through asking and connecting with folks. And I think something too to really kind of keep in mind too, where people are willing to share. So and share information, but you have to also be willing to go seek it out. So those would be my takeaways.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you both said. Just not being afraid to ask for help. People really do want to help, and also making yourself available to help others too. And just maybe figuring out what your why is, what your intention is for the path that you're going down, and figuring out how to focus on that. There's so many distractions, and we're very also bombarded constantly by so many things, especially in a city area. So just finding those ways that you can continue to develop who you want to be, and find those groups that you can get involved in. And I'd also think for myself too, I would probably just have wanted to and continue to encourage myself that it's okay to not have a linear path, that you can move up, you can move down, you can move left, you can move right, and just being open to whatever possibilities come your way and opportunities. So that's what I would add.
And I want to add two more things that I was thinking about it as well. For anyone who's currently a student or is a recent graduate, one thing I realized after grad school, right? Like on average, grad school classes tend to be smaller. So you might have a class of 12 to 15, or maybe max 20, 24 students, excuse me, I shouldn't say kids, students. So, as you're progressing through your programs, make friends with at least 2 to 3 people in your classes, right? Because at the end of it, you'll have at least 24, 25 solid connections, and you never know where they're going to end up. Like one of my friends from graduate school, she was doing the Hunter Baruch joint degree program, and she's a higher up at one of the hospitals in New York. And, I've been able to connect people I know to her. And that's just off the strength of us, getting together in the library, doing homework together, and taking classes, and just kind of building those relationships. I think that's very instrumental in as you transition, because one thing I did realize as well, it's like it helps when it helps, the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That does play a role in career progression as well. So that's my other tidbit of advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Aimee, you brought up a really good point. I love what you said about like being open to opportunities. We hosted an alum last year who had mentioned that she had thought of her career not as like of climbing a career ladder, but rather instead of like a lattice that you would find in a garden, the vines grow up and down, all this stuff. And I've taken that like metaphor with me everywhere. Give her a lot of credit too. So no, I think that was pretty much what I had thought about when you were saying that. But no, that was all really wonderful. My last question for you all before we'll go into the Q&A is what was the one thing that you had all taken into consideration, or something that was just really important to you all when you were making the move? I'll ask you to answer it in the sense of what was something that you had to consider when you were making the move, and then what was something you were considering when you were searching for the positions that you had in DC?
I can go ahead and start. So I think for me, when I went to grad school, I didn't have an intention of going into the private sector necessarily. It wasn't something that I had envisioned for myself. I thought, public servant for life, that's what I want to do. And part of me still does want to do that. But I think being able to transition into something different and new was an opportunity for me to explore. And I've enjoyed that journey, exploring a different industry. Also, consulting it's an opportunity to learn something new all the time. Like I'm constantly learning, constantly trying to sharpen what I currently know and also build upon that. So when transitioning into consulting, one of my career services mentors mentioned to me that, an opportunity, think of it as jumping onto a lily pad, and then from there being able to jump into other lily pads and other opportunities. And I always think about that when I am taking on even different roles in my job, like, how will this help me kind of explore, but also get to the next level? Whether I know what that is or not is something I'm, you kind of figure out as you go, but that's what I think about. And then, yeah, I think that was the biggest thing just for consulting, learning new things, meeting new people, and keeping it kind of fresh always. Even in grad school, I considered myself more of a generalist, even though I was really interested in economic development. So for me, it's been really helpful to kind of be able to explore different things.
Okay, I can go. I think for my career path and my job choices, before I went to Baruch College for my MPA, I also had some like social service experiences, and I really just love being in that intersection of administration for a nonprofit, but also focusing on supporting youth and families, and youth, like as far as focusing on teaching and just how policy goes into that, how project management goes into that. So focusing on business elements like metrics. And so I just love that intersection. And so that was one reason why I chose the path that I did. And like I mentioned before, just having that opportunity to continue networking with people from all different backgrounds and walks of life. That's been really great too. And I think for moving to DC, I really just thought practically, like, am I ready to settle in New York City? And I wasn't. And so just wanted to go to a similar place, have that city life where I continue growing and learning from other people. And I also have family in Florida. So it's like, I still want to be on the East Coast, and I was kind of in between my family in Connecticut and Florida. So maybe slowly making my way down the East Coast was exciting for me. So personally as well.
Yeah, you're like a happy medium now.
Yeah.
Jonathan, go ahead.
My experience was a little different. So when I started at Baruch, I'm Samantha, like you, I'm also a SUNY graduate, but I didn't go to Albany. I went to Buff State. But I'll never forget my first week of graduate school. I walk into class, I'm super confident, and the teacher has to stand up and introduce ourselves, whatever. And she's like, tell us about yourself. And I'm like, I'm Jonathan, I just graduated from undergrad. And I felt so proud. And the guy in front of me was like, yeah, I'm so-and-so, I work at KPMG. And I was like, I'm going to take a seat now. But my whole driving force behind me getting a master's degree was, while I was away at school, I realized that the socioeconomic fabric of my community was deteriorating at a rate that made me scratch my head. And it kind of raised the question of, why is no one addressing this? If I went away to school in August and a new business had started that summer, by the time I came back the following summer, it was already gone. And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole. So I always knew I wanted to figure out, like, that was like my niche. Like, why is this happening? Because this doesn't only happen in my neighborhood, happens around the world. So that kind of led me to saying, okay, I knew I wanted to be in the political arena. And I was fortunate enough to do that, where my first job was, working campaigns as an auditor, which wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it laid a great foundation for me. And then it kind of helped me open doors to get to where I am now, because when I was transitioning to the DC area, my biggest thing was, I still want to be close enough to New York where I can get there within under 5 hours, 3 hours by train, 45-minute flight, 4-hour drive. Because majority of my family still lives in New York. And the cost of living, I'd already lived in DC for a little bit. I already knew what it was like. But fortunately, I was able to find a place in Maryland that's close enough to DC, about 20 minutes out. I'm right near the Blue Line on their metro. And those were pretty much the biggest things for me. Like, as I progressed in my career, And I wanted to get to the highest political space, which would be Capitol Hill or the White House, which is still one of my goals. And moving to Maryland and starting over as a door knocker when you're a campaign manager, it's a very humbling experience. But you had to put the work in wherever you go, right? So that was pretty much my decision. It was just cost of living. How do I transition to, the highest arena for the political game, and essentially still be able to, have a decent cost of living where it's not like I'm living again in Brooklyn again and my rent's like $3,000. So those are pretty much the driving factors for me.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. I think like across the three of you, you've like, I don't know if you've been monitoring the chat, but I'm going to start throwing in some questions that we've received from some of our participants. But yeah, you all pretty much have touched upon like factors that are really important to people when they're making such a big life move. And, this is basically what our panel is about, like kind of helping people understand like what that's like. And we are specializing in DC today. Okay, so we'll go into open Q&A now. So I'm going to start with some questions that are in the chat, but please feel free to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question directly to our panelists. So go ahead or put them in the chat. I'm more than happy to read them for you. But the first question that came in from Jessica was, do any of you feel like that it was hard to break into the DC job market? You're just starting out in policy work, not already experienced with government politics. And the second part of it was also just being from out of state. Paola, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I will say I was fortunate to have a job before transitioning to DC. So my experience is a little bit different. I would recommend that if you have that opportunity to have a job prior, totally work towards that. If you don't, definitely have had some friends who arrived to DC without a job necessarily lined up. And from the experience that they had, it was difficult securing because you're brand new to I don't want to discourage anyone, but it was a little bit harder because their networks weren't necessarily here, and they had to meet new people. So it was a lot of networking, getting coffee, doing coffee chats, hitting people up on LinkedIn, and just really putting your face out there so that, when opportunities did come up, these folks had them immediately in mind. So that's actually how it happened. And all friends, luckily, everyone secured a job, and it was something that was a little bit challenging, but overall, I think it's 100% doable. And I think you need to just, when going through that process, giving yourself grace and patience, because it is a process, but you will be fine looking for something.
Yeah. Well, Paola, just a quick follow-up question for you. What did you find was the most, or what networking strategy do you enjoy the most? And then second, how do you take care of yourself after doing all that networking? And like, because it is a very like high and low, you oscillate between, yes, this is working, and then, oh my gosh, wait, I'm not hearing back. So how did you kind of take care of yourself in that period?
I think in terms of like the self-care kind of component? Yeah, I think DC is a very walkable city. And that's something I've personally enjoyed, just being outside, taking the time for yourself to kind of reset, being in nature, walk down the mall, and then remind yourself why you're there. Why did you come to DC? Just seeing the Capitol, the White House, the monuments, like for me, that was always, and it still is, very revitalizing. So if I needed some time to myself, I'll just take a walk to the mall and walk around as a reminder to my purpose here. And then also that I think also having a mindset that there's abundance, there's opportunities for everyone. It takes time to kind of get there. At least that's been my experience, and seeing my friends also go through a similar process.
Yeah. And seeing people, knowing that you are not the only one also is it's a huge help. So yeah, either Jonathan or Amy, kind of going back to this question of how, what did you feel like it was like to break into the DC job market?
So I will definitely say it was a personal challenge for me because majority of my network was based in New York, and although they did have ties to the DC area, and they connected me with individuals, so that helped. But I remember when I made the decision to move out of New York, I think it was about 6 months beforehand, I went on LinkedIn. I just started adding people I started adding organizations, companies, and individuals from those places that I want to work in. And I messaged them and I just, said, hey, I'm Jonathan. Would you be interested in an informal interview about your experience with XYZ? And, it's 50-50, right? Either someone's gonna respond or not. And most people did respond. And that was really helpful. I don't think it's impossible. I think you just have to be very strategic on what you want to do. And essentially figure out, okay, let's say if you want to work in policy, well, there's a lot of opportunities out here. It's just where do you want to land to get your experience, to build up your resume and then move on from there. But I know in my experience, that was probably the thing that I did daily. Like I said, I'm going to add at least 5 new companies and 3 people from each, just to kind of have like a good percentage of people who would willing to speak to me. And that's something that I still do till this day. So I don't think it's impossible. I think you just have to really figure out, check out the playing ground, and then figure out, okay, my next course of action and who to reach out to. And even if you see a job on LinkedIn nowadays, with LinkedIn, you can message the recruiter directly if there is a recruiter. So definitely take advantage of that as well.
Thank you. And Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, and I also use LinkedIn a lot. And I think, I'm not a LinkedIn expert, but it seems like sometimes a job could even be posted on there that isn't posted anywhere else yet, because it's something that an employer can do really quick and just post it. And then, yeah, the nice element that you can contact the recruiter. So I also love making connections on LinkedIn, so I would encourage that too. And for me, so getting my position, I think one thing that helped me was just having a variety of experiences and just the variety of classes that I took at Baruch. So just having a wide range of being able to bring in my experience with policy, with nonprofit, focusing on different social issues. And so I think that was one thing that I connected with my former boss. And we also had like a mutual friend from one of our previous experiences. And so that was also something that helped, just like finding that personal connection really helped me too.
Absolutely. And you actually made a really good hint towards the transferable skills that, they're everywhere, transferable values, interests, etc. So thank you. Saint Ev, I see that you have your hand up. You'd like to ask your question.
Hi, my name is Zainab. Sorry, I'm in a lounge area, but I'm a Brandeis student. And I was just curious about like what kind of organizations do you meet with when you're in DC, or you just take the initiative to just like look at, like you said, Jonathan, to look at organizations that you want to work for and just like cold email them or like cold message them?
Great question. So usually it depends on, I look at it from 2 ways. If it's a major event like Congressional Black Caucus Week, where every organization is doing something at the that week, then I'll make it a point to go. But if it's something like the cycling club, for example, I want to join, I'll be very specific in targeting where I want to dedicate my free time to versus my trying to advance my career, if that makes sense. And the cool thing with DC is there's so many organizations like that, and there's so many like fun clubs you can join as well. So did that answer your question? I'm not sure. Did that answer your question?
Kind of, but like if like for example, right now I'm in grad school, and like for the first year, since you were a former grad student, like you need to get an internship for the summer. And so I was thinking this as an opportunity for meeting the employers that I would like to work for in DC, because after I graduate, I want to be in DC. Ideally, like in everybody's case in here, I'm assuming, like with a job or some kind of offer. And then also I just want to plus one whoever said, how did you like go about like finding like a temporary like living situation for the summer if you're not going to stay like for the entire like year?
Got you. Okay, so I would definitely say like come up with a list. So I would say look up organizations that speak to you and like how you want to transition outside of grad school as you join the workforce. And I would definitely say go to your career counselors, guidance, and then pretty much have them see if they have any connections there. That's always like your first step because you're a grad student, right? And it's easier to transition when you're kind of under the banner of a school because they already have those connections laid out for you. And if, let's say, if there's an organization that they don't have those connections at, then I would say LinkedIn, like just literally reach out. You could probably see if they have recruiters or if they have HR. You can kind of Google certain titles. Or I'll tell you what I personally do is like, say if I'm looking at Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, where I work, right? I'll look up the organization and I'll see who follows that specific page. And then you have their titles there and then you can message them that way as well. So that's what I would recommend doing. But I would definitely say, since you're in grad school, definitely try using those channels first and exhausting those before you try to reach out on your own.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
The moving to DC and where to find housing. So something that I saw a lot and I used a lot too, where there's a lot of folks I hear use Facebook, and these Facebook groups are where you're gonna get hints as to what's available. I joined like this DMV Latina millennial Latina group, and everyone sharing resources, sharing opportunities, sharing housing. So definitely log back into your Facebook pages and get onto those groups. And there's also like Facebook Marketplace too, where you can find furniture and stuff like that, because people are always in transition here. There's a lot of transplants coming in and out. So there's always a lot of movement. I do think there's also peaks, obviously, for internships in the summer, and then available vacancies come the fall. So there's peaks throughout the year, but definitely log back into Facebook to find those types of opportunities.
Thank you, Paola.
Yeah, I also use Facebook myself. And so between like the 2 weeks that I accepted a position and then moved, I didn't actually go to see where I was going to live in person, which I mean, that's your own personal preference if you think that's a good idea or not, but I didn't. I just like FaceTimed the roommate I was going to have. And so it worked, but of course not for everyone.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we had a couple questions about cost of living factor. I'm going to see if I can kind of combine them into one question. But one, was there a strategy when you were looking for places to live? Like, were you looking in specific neighborhoods? I know you had mentioned there were like Facebook groups, I guess you already seem to have some sort of leads. And then how does the cost of living factor into your enjoyment of the DC area?
That's a great question. I'll go first. So when I was looking for where to live, I wanted somewhere that was close enough. If I need to get into DC, I can get in within a 20-minute train ride because their metro is actually pretty good. So that was my biggest thing. If I didn't want to drive, because driving in DC can be rather difficult depending on the time of day you're trying to get into DC. And how do I enjoy the cost of living allow me to enjoy DC? Well, I'm at brunch like twice a month. So what my plan was, I kind of didn't, with me living kind of on the outskirts of DC in Maryland, my rent was a lot cheaper, but I also had to pay for commuting, but the commuting isn't that bad. Unlike New York, where it's like, you take the subway for $2.25. In DC, you have, I don't have my wallet on me, I can't show you guys, but their metro is like you tap in to get on the metro and tap out. So it depends on the distance. They charge you per distance and not like a flat rate. So I kind of have to factor that in when I'm going out, if I'm taking an Uber or whatever. But I feel like, you can have the best of both. It just depends on if you want to be directly in the city. Those opportunities do exist because, like Amy said, there's a whole bunch of transplants. People are always constantly moving, looking for roommates. So it's possible. It just depends on your level of comfort, and if you don't mind, taking a train for 20 minutes versus like just walking outside and being in DC.
For Paula and Amy, I guess I'll add on to this question just for the sake of time. When you were looking at, I guess perhaps when you were looking at the positions you were looking at, did you find that in your mind, were you already thinking, would I have to negotiate for a cost of living?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first moved, I had three other roommates, and so that made the living situation pretty affordable. Yeah, and as far as the metro, I think when I was looking, I just wanted to make sure I could walk there. So I think I gave myself like 15 to 20 minute max distance from the metro, which it's good to get the exercise, but in the winter you don't want to walk too much farther than that. There's also buses though that could take you to the metro, so that was helpful too. I would do that as well. Yeah, and I think just like anywhere else, I recommend budgeting. I budget just to like help myself keep track of things. And yeah, living in Alexandria, it isn't it's also pretty high cost of living, so it's not too different from actually being in DC, but I like having that separation, I think, from being in the city too, just being closer to water and nature, but still having access to the metro because it does go all the way out there. So that's awesome too.
Thanks so much. And Paola, before you go, I know you have to hop off for a meeting, so
Yeah.
anything you have to add, plus any last remarks you might have for our crowd here today?
Absolutely. So something that I echo everything that Jonathan and Amy have said. Metro was really big for me. Don't have a car out here. I ended up moving to Crystal City because I looked at different rates and then even square footage. In Virginia, you'll get a lot more for the same price as you would in DC. So that's always something to keep in mind. I also live near a Costco, which was really helpful during the pandemic. So it's also just helpful in general. Also a good way to make friends and, share your Costco card with people. Anyway, that's just another plug for Costco. And lastly, I think something I also kept in mind too, and this is a very adult thing, is taxes as well and your paychecks. Virginia has lower taxes than DC does, so that's also something to keep in mind when thinking about what you're willing to kind of experience in the city. But overall, it's really easy to move around here. So I love the metro. Can't say any more about it. Just that good. And then last words, I do have to jump for a meeting, but it was really nice to meet all of you. Please feel free to reach out. I'm more than available to chat offline. Find me on LinkedIn and we can definitely set some time up. And if you end up out here, please reach out as well. Love to meet you and be part of your.
Thanks so much, Paola. So feel free to hop off, like enjoy your meeting, or good luck, whatever sentiment you need for that. Jonathan and Amy, just really quickly, any last remarks that you have for our crowd here today about living and working in DC?
Yeah, I just want to add to what Amy and Paola said. Essentially, but adulting 101, you can make sure you budget, factor in the taxes, and one thing I took advantage of was my position has a pension because it's a state position. So I contribute to my pension and it kind of lowered my tax. So my take home is actually more than it was before I started contributing. So like little hacks like that. And I would say, again, just, factoring living in DC, with me being outside of Maryland and Paola being in Alexandria, like DC is one of those places where you can be 20 minutes out and still enjoy the city. So even if you don't start in DC, if you start around it, you can always make your way back into it. So don't feel like if you're not, in the heart of DC working, that you're gonna be never gonna make it there. Because I'm not in DC and I still enjoy it. I do miss, when I want to get the city feel, I do head into DC for the weekends. So it all depends on essentially how you want to move. I think it was Amy who said it's like it's not an up and down path. It's like a winding road kind of thing. So be mindful of that. And just to echo what Paola said, you know, I'm available as well. I'll put my email in the chat and my LinkedIn information if anybody wants to add me, any questions you guys have as well. And like, I guess my last piece of advice, honestly, is just believe in yourself. Like if you see a job posting and just go for it. You can always negotiate salary. And there's plenty of opportunities out here. So, you know, just believe in yourself and do your math for your budget and go from there.
Oh, budgeting is so real. So thank you. Amy, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just thank you all for joining us on this panel. It's also great to be able to share my own experiences, and I'm happy to connect. If anyone still has any burning questions or questions you didn't want to ask today, feel free to connect. So we're here to support you. And if any of you do move to DC, we can get coffee or something and chat. So
Oh,
thank
that's
you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, everyone, thank you for hanging on for a couple of minutes. Please help me thank our wonderful panelists, Amy, Jonathan, and Paola, who's in her meeting somewhere. A follow-up email will be sent with a recording of today's event and all of our panelists' information. Everyone, please have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the weekend coming up, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.